Welcome to another edition of CHP Talks. We are here today with John Sikkema, who is a lawyer, and with Jim Enos, CHP Ontario President. So we've got two guests, a special show, and we're going to be talking about CHP's intervention in the Guelph right to life court case. So Rod, why don't you introduce our guests for this evening?
Well, I will, and thank you both for joining us tonight. Jim Enos is well known to most of our listeners. He's our Ontario president. He's been a CHP candidate multiple times. And Jim is no stranger to the world of governance and the kind of activity that goes on in debating public policy. He has spent the past 25 years participating at public tables and influencing public policy. Between 2016 and 2018, Jim, as the CEO for CHP Hamilton Mountain, represented CHP Canada in a judicial review regarding political free speech in Canada. Ultimately, three judges unanimously ruled strongly in favor of CHP Canada's right to political free speech. Jim believes Canadians must be free to believe or not believe, and to have the freedom to peacefully express those beliefs publicly without fear of prosecution. Now, John Sikkema is first-time guest on the show. Thank you, John, for joining us. John is a lawyer, a founding member of the Acacia group, practicing in both litigation and solicitor departments. John works with churches, charities, and other faith-based organizations to assist them with all their legal needs, including litigation, policy development, and corporate or charitable matters. Prior to joining Acacia Lawyers, John served as legal counsel to the Association for Reformed Political Action, that's ARPA, and as a member of ARPA's law and policy team. And prior to his work with ARPA, John served as associate legal counsel for Christian Legal Fellowship. John earned his JD from Queen's University in 2014 and his LLM from Emory University in 2019, where he was awarded the Gertie and John Witt Prize in Law and Religion for outstanding work in law and Christianity. John was counsel in a precedent-setting charter case which struck portions of the Ontario Freedom of Information and Privacy Protection Act. In that case, John successfully argued that the Charter of Rights and Freedoms guarantee to freedom of expression required the government to provide access to public information. John's writing has also appeared in the National Post, Policy Options, Comment, Christian Legal Journal, Law Matters, and the Supreme Court Law Review. He serves also as an executive committee member of Advocates for the Rule of Law, a Canadian legal think tank. And with that, John, again, I'll say once more, thank you very much for joining us tonight. I know this has been a busy day for you, but I think maybe every day is a busy day for you.
Thank you very much. Good to be here.
So, Jim, in terms of why CHP is an intervenor in this case, do you want to give us just a little bit of background, and then we're going to get into the factum as to the meat of what actually is being presented on CHP's behalf by John in the Guelph right to life court case?
Yes, of course. Well, CHP is really blessed to be associated with the Acacia Group. We actually were associated with Alberto Blizagopoulos, who would be one of John's partners of Acacia Group, and we entered into a court setting back in 2016 with the city of Hamilton, which was resolved in 2018. Essentially, it was about freedom of political speech by groups, and we had a unanimous decision, very strong ruling in our favor. And then after that, around December, John's partner, Albertus, contacted us and said there's a similar sort of case going on in Guelph, a different topic, but still around freedom of speech. And it was about the Guelph area right to life. He said, would CHP be interested in being an intervenor in the case? And we looked into it and did the fundraising. Our people responded quickly and graciously, and the answer was yes. And so here we are, and we're so glad now to be able to give our little input regarding freedom of speech and the charter, and that's why John's here tonight.
So that's great. I've got the factum in front of me, but not everyone who's listening or watching will. So, John, do you want to walk us through, or maybe even describe off the top, what the point is in being an intervener in a case like this? What's the value of it?
Sure. So I think interveners are able to often bring another perspective to a case that the party might not. In this case, of course, the Christian Heritage Party is a pro-life party. You use pro-life language. You talk about the unborn as children, as human beings, and so on. And so where the party, in this case, Guelph Right to Life, their lawyer may want to focus on a particular line of argument. We could take a line of argument that could be a bit riskier if that was going to be your main line of argument and so on, but it can kind of supplement and strengthen the main party's line of argument. So I think our line of argument in this case focuses much more on the city's problem with the use of terms like rights or human right or personal pronouns to refer to the unborn. We focus much more on that and say why that's not a legitimate line of reasoning by the city or by ad standards, which played a part in taking these ads down. The main party is more focused on mainstream law, saying how important freedom of expression is, more focused on explaining how this is an opinion and so on. So I think interveners can, and I think CHP does in this case, introduce a unique perspective and line of argument.
So that's important, and thanks for being that person in between, and because obviously a political party can't just go to court without someone being the intervener. So thanks, John, for your efforts and for this factum. And you alluded to this already, but the heading in the factum is, it is not misleading to use the term human rights or human rights in reference to an unborn child. And do you want to just walk us through a little bit the way that that's written and why it's written the way that it is?
Sure. So the city in this case, where ad standards is a private body that gives an opinion to the city, an opinion about the ads in question. And one of the ads says that life should be the most fundamental right. And there's an image of a child in utero. And what the city does to get rid of that ad in the face of complaints is to say, you know what? Life should be the most fundamental human right. And then there's another one that says, sorry, I should keep it in front of me before I get them mixed up. But the other one is human rights should not depend on where you are. Right. And that's an image of a child, a pregnant woman, and then a child, a woman holding a child. Anyway, in either case, references to unborn children being human. Pretty straightforward. They use the term human in their advertisements. And the city goes to the criminal code, of all things, goes to the homicide provisions, and says in the homicide provisions of the criminal code, it defines the term human being. And in the criminal code, as I'm sure a lot of CHP listeners know, it says a child becomes a human being when it is born. I'm paraphrasing, but that's when a child becomes a human being. And so the city grasps that and says, well, there you go. The unborn child is not a human being, says the criminal code, and your ads are misleading people. And apparently never stops to ask several questions. One is, why does the criminal code refer to the unborn child as a child? And if you look at the term child, a child is a human, right? And another is, why are we even going to the criminal code? Is the purpose of human being in the criminal code to regulate speech, to regulate debate on what is a human? It's not. Actually, that term, human being in the criminal code, goes all the way back to 1892 and earlier, at a time when killing an unborn child was a serious offense that could get you life in prison. Okay, so even though people today are rightly upset that human being is defined the way it is in the criminal code, because it seems to be out of line with science and so on, we need to recognize that it was never meant to be a scientific definition. It's a technical legal definition for a specific line of offenses when other offenses used to protect the preborn child, right? It's not meant to regulate debate. It's not meant to settle science. It's not meant to settle philosophy. The city going to the criminal code for this purpose is ridiculous, to regulate a public debate, things that people are going to read on a bus, right? They're not thinking, hey, is that what the criminal code says is a human? So I think common sense kind of goes out the window because they're looking for a way to get rid of this ad. They're looking for a way to say it's misleading to say that an unborn child is human. And they do so in a way that, frankly, I think should lead to some embarrassment, because they latch onto this term human being and ignore the fact that their criminal code at the same time refers to it as a child. So that's something we explain.
Yeah, and I found it interesting that in there you said, like, for instance, adult humans reproduce humans. That's what they produce. So, how can anybody begin to say it's not human? But your point was very good, and it's the first time I've ever caught it when I read the factum, is that the reason it's defined like it is in 223, that's just simply to define that law of murder. It doesn't make that baby in the womb any less human.
That's right. Right. And it's certainly not meant to regulate debate on what a human is, right?
Right.
I wanted to, I don't know if this is a good time to point out, I think it's interesting having the Abortion Rights Coalition as an intervener in this case. And they're arguing, they're trying to present, they're not supposed to present evidence, but they're quoting all kinds of complaints to say this is how this hurts women, these kinds of ads. And one of the things that they actually quote someone as saying is they say to even raise the issue of the preborn child being human or having rights, to even raise that issue is to threaten women's rights as this group would understand the meaning of women's rights. And so they, at least in quoting that person approvingly, are showing a kind of ideological commitment to ignoring the humanity of the preborn. Yeah. Right? That's not something, the city is a little more clever than that. They try to say, oh, these are ways that it's misleading. But some of the complainants, and sometimes the Abortion Rights Coalition has sent people to complain to the city about these kinds of ads. They are saying, look, forget the science, forget the morality, forget the dictionary definitions of human and child and so on. If you go there, you threaten abortion, and we must not do that. Therefore, forget the scientific reasoning, forget the philosophical reasoning. We are pre-committed as a presuppositional matter to not recognizing any status for the unborn. And so how dare you imply that? That's kind of the line of reasoning that is implied in the Abortion Rights Coalition's factum. In this case, they're an intervener on the other side. And I think that if we can draw the court's attention to that and say, this is not, basically get around the kind of sophistry of the reasoning of the city and look at this, there's this ideological opposition to this point of view, and therefore it's trying to stamp it out. Yeah. And that's what courts applying the charter are there to prevent, is one side stamping out the other side in the public square.
Yeah, it's just another example, a pretty graphic example of the cancel culture at work, where, if they don't like what you have to say, and that was the case in Hamilton as well, with the case that we won there, and the judges agreed with us, that, to say that I don't like your message, therefore you're not allowed to say it. I mean, anyone with their eyes open can see that leads to a tyrannical dictatorship where only those in power get to say what they want to say and everyone else has to shut up. So we're appreciative of you and Albertos and other lawyers who are representing the right of Canadians, especially Christian Canadians, pro-life Canadians, to speak up on these matters, because otherwise the public does not hear our point of view. If Hamilton or Guelph get to set the standards and not allow us to express our point of view.
That's right.
And could it not actually lead to, if we, some people say, well, you might not win, what if you don't win? My point would be, what if we don't try? Like, what would be the impact on CHP Canada? We could be banned. We could be banned from as a political party because you're not allowed to say human unless you're referring to somebody that's left the womb.
Yeah.
So, I mean, the repercussions of not participating are very high, I think. I think we have nothing to lose.
We have much to lose by not trying.
Yes.
By not engaging in these kinds of court decisions, we stand to lose freedom of speech, and we definitely stand to lose an opportunity to present in court the idea again of the humanity of the preborn. But going on then with the factum, there's 2 points that I think we should just cover maybe a little bit more fully. Letter D, to morally critique an act is not to disparage persons who have engaged in or may engage in this act. Such reasoning would stifle moral and political debate. And John, do you want to elaborate a little bit on that? Or
Sure. So the city takes the position that because the ads imply that the preborn are human, and also that they are persons. Now, the ads never claim that they enjoy legal personhood or the full protection or partial protection of the law. The ads never say that. The ads do use the term human, and the ads do. One of the ads uses the term her, referring to the preborn child as her. And they say, well, that implies personhood, and personhood apparently implies legal personhood, and that's not only misleading, but it's disparaging because you're implying that someone who has an abortion kills a person, right? And so it's reasoning. The reasoning is backwards. The first question would be, is the preborn child human? Is the preborn child a person? Is there any difference between human being and person? If so, why? What's your argument for that? And so on. You can have a dialogue about that. Obviously, we would say there's a big problem in separating humanity and personhood, but that issue aside, they say, no, you cannot say that, again, because of where it leads. And it does, of course, lead to the issue of, well, if you imply or state directly that there's some moral status that the preborn child has, you are raising an ethical question about abortion. You're calling into question, and therefore you are also raising questions about the people who have abortions. Now, those we recognize that's obviously a distinction, right? Someone may do a particular thing in circumstances that I don't face, and for me to say I never did that thing, I'm a better person than you. Well, that's not the point, and that's certainly not the point the ads make. But they do raise questions, of course, about abortion as an ethical decision. Is it ethical? Is it unethical? If it's ethical, when is it ever ethical? And they basically say just by raising that, you're disparaging anyone who's had an abortion or is considering an abortion. Yeah. And then we have to say, well, anytime anyone thinks about doing a wrong thing, if you criticize pornography, are you disparaging anyone who's ever looked at pornography or might look at pornography in the future? You might be criticizing the act of doing that. You're not saying they become worthless as a person if they've done that wrong thing. These are just things that I think for a lot of us are just common sense. It's the sin-sinner distinction, right? And that just seems to be lost here. And the city relies on that. Abortion Rights Coalition is emphasizing that heavily, that you are disparaging women by criticizing abortion. And I think we have to come back and say, maybe there are ways to criticize something, right? Anyone who's had an abortion is worthless or filling some kind of name. And we would say, you know what, if you're the mayor of a town, let's say, and you can kind of control what the advertising is, maybe you don't want those kinds of nasty, disparaging messages, but there's ways to critique acts, drinking and driving, right? Without saying all alcoholics are pieces of garbage, course we wouldn't say that. There's a distinct, so there's ways to say things, and basically to just point out, these are very tame and straightforward ways of raising moral questions about abortion itself without disparaging or questioning the dignity or worth of people who have had abortions, right?
Yeah, and it's one thing to look back at those who have had abortions, who have lost their child to abortion, but of course the purpose for all pro-lifers, Guelph Right to Life, and our purpose is to prevent or to awaken maybe someone's thinking and consciousness that they don't do something that they're going to regret, because many women do live with regret for their abortion. So we are actually trying to save them the agony of living with a decision that they might regret for the rest of their lives. So rather than looking backwards and pointing fingers, we just want people to be aware of the facts that there is a child there that has a right to exist, of course, in our point of view.
Yeah, I mean, it gets dangerous when we start saying that we can't speak out anything that has any ethical or moral value to it. It's like you said, we're going to have to shut down Mothers Against Drunk Driving. Are going to have to be shut down with their commercials. We're going to have to stop teaching our children how to live healthy because, you're going to make Billy next door feel bad because his parents don't live like you. Like, we can't say anything morally anymore. Now all of a sudden, morality becomes immorality. And it seems some people say that's a far off picture, but not really. We're right there. We're right at the edge of shutting down any sort of critique of any sort of behavior at all. It's almost an affront to, I can just see street preachers being arrested for raising anything morally, which is all that they do, raise morality all the time.
Yeah, it's happened. Well, I think that brings us perfectly to this point on the fact that the indispensability of free political speech and access to public forums. And those two were certainly tested. And perhaps we have, I trust that the precedent that CHP gained through the Hamilton court decision will factor strongly into this one. Is that an angle that you'll be taking, John, hopefully?
Yeah, the CHP precedent is very valuable on that point. Certainly there is older case law making that point, but the CHP case nicely applies it to this kind of particular situation. So one of the reasons to emphasize that point, and one of the points we make that I believe is unique. Certainly the main party, Guelph Right to Life, makes the point that you should have access to these kinds of spaces. It's publicly owned and controlled. The charter applies. Freedom of expression applies. There's reasonable limits, but let's keep them reasonable. The other point being that if you kick someone out, the city and Abortion Rights Coalition are going to say, well, you can maybe advertise somewhere else. You can pass pamphlets around. You can do this video. No one's going to take this off the internet unless, YouTube or someone takes it off and they're a private company and all the other. But basically, there's other ways you can get your message out there. Do you really need a spot on the Guelph bus, right? Let's keep the Guelph city bus inoffensive and whatever. And that's kind of the argument they're going to say is it's not a big deal. And I think we need to come back, and thankfully there's some case law on this to say, actually, it is a big deal. If the only ones who are allowed in the public spaces are those with a pro-abortion message, that sends a strong public message that that's the only legitimate position, right? And people might even read stories about, oh yeah, the CHP, they got kicked out of, Hamilton says no more CHP ads, or Guelph says no more Right to Life ads. What message does that send to the broader public? Not only are they not going to see your ads anymore in any of those spaces, they're also going to get the message that, oh, the government and the courts, yeah, they're all fine with kicking these people out. They must be bad. The reality is people don't often make decisions on a whole lot of information. And if they hear that you're kicked out, they assume it's for a legitimate reason. And too bad for you, you're an extremist. I mean, that's so to say, no, there needs to be general openness. There's certainly certain types of style, or we call it manner and context kind of restrictions. on advertising, where there's reason we might not have graphic images on a bus, or curse words or things like that just aren't needed to get your message across and are needlessly offensive. Here, I think these are, obviously tame, thoughtful ads, and they have a particular message that's not favored. Anyway, and that message deserves to be part of public life is the main point there.
I think that our society is becoming more and more juvenile. Like, if you want to win the argument, just say your feelings were hurt. You can't have an adult discussion anymore. Like CHP, we're criticized quite regularly, and I never take offense. I'm willing to have an open conversation, open dialogue about any subject. If you disagree with me and you give me all the reasons why, I can live with that. Why can't people on the other side have open conversations about any public policy? It should always be open for discussion and everybody behave themselves, but it just seems like you've got to see it from a certain perspective, or you're not even allowed to come to the table.
Yeah.
Well, that's the challenge of our time. Brings us back to Rod's point earlier of cancel culture. Shut up if you don't agree with me, rather than let's talk about it if we have a disagreement. And it's a dangerous place to be in our culture. And I know we're drawing near to the end of our time, but are there any final thoughts, John, that you want to share on this case with our audience tonight?
Yeah, I'm looking forward to the hearing. I'm also looking forward to discussing further with you what points may be worth making. I don't know if you've had the chance to see the Abortion Rights Coalition argument yet, but the nice thing is, even though we can't respond to it in writing, we can certainly address points in it in the hearing. So the hearing will be interesting to watch. I'm really glad the CHP is part of this case. As a political party with right to life in your platform, with a history of ads, I think you are very well placed to speak into this case, and the court obviously agreed. So I'm thankful to be able to be a part of it, as a lawyer, to have the opportunity to participate, which I'm thankful to CHP for. So yeah, thank you very much.
Hey, John, can I just ask you, is this something that is live linked, that there's like public can watch it while live streamed?
So just so June 14th, we trust that the court case will be happening. Is there any chance that would be something people could watch live?
Yes, it is. So but I believe you need, because it will be an electronic hearing, that you need to request a link. So I can send, if you want to share that more broadly, I can send you information about requesting that. So it's maybe, it's not just live streamed so that anyone can watch, but I think anyone can request to watch. Courts are supposed to be open, but they're not generally just live streamed, right? So it's kind of like you could go to the court and watch. You can go to the court staff, get the link, and I can let you know how that works. And then if you want to let others know, you can pass that on.
I think it would be exciting to watch. I think there's probably a lot of listeners that would love to tune in and watch.
Yeah, I think it would be an interesting one.
Well, thank you, John, for representing us as an intervener, and for you and the Acacia Group reaching out to us and suggesting that we would take on that role. It's not a role we've been in before, but we're very happy to be involved, and we certainly are pleased that the Guelph Right to Life, I mean, they were beautiful ads. They did a great job, and we're glad that they are not just taking us lying down, but they are representing those values in free speech and pro-life, and that there's good people like you who are standing in the gap in the legal profession. We need more people like you, because you're worked. We know that you're carrying quite a workload, you and your group, and we wish you all the best, not only in this case, but in other cases that you're involved in as well.
Thank you very much.
Yes. So just to wrap up, a couple things. Remember June 14th, that's the date of the hearing. Also, Jim Enos wrote a communique on the topic and on the factum. It's on CHP's website. And even if someone is not pro-life, this defense of freedom of speech is something that they actually should be thankful for. And of course, if you're pro-life, be doubly thankful. So we wish you all the best, John. Thank you very much for taking the time with us. And thank you all to our viewers and our listeners for listening, and hope that you'll pass this on. It's an important case, an important topic, and we hope you'll join us next time for another edition of CHP Talks.
Yeah, thank you.